The lock clicked, and I want to tell you, I handled it well. I want to tell you, I read the situation, stayed composed, and responded like a reasonable adult professional who understood what was happening. But I was standing in a conference room at 9:45 at night with my CEO between me and the only door out, and composed is not the word I would use for what I was. She turned around, looked at me, not threatening, not warm either, that steady, unreadable quality she carried everywhere, like she had already considered every version of how this moment could go and was simply waiting to see which one I'd be. Then, she told me what she had actually found in those vendor records, all of it, and I understood, under the hum of fluorescent lights, that the project I thought I'd been assigned to was never the real thing. Let me go back. 2 years before any of this, I had a business, a real one. Me and my closest friend Marcus, logistics consulting, one solid client, a real retainer, the kind of early traction that makes you start believing you understand how things work. Then Marcus made a financial decision without telling me, then another. Then he brought in a third-party investor who bought his stake and left me holding a contract I couldn't honor, a debt I didn't cause, and a version of events that had already moved through our professional network before I could say a word. Didn't fight it publicly. Not because I was above it, I was too exhausted and too humiliated to explain myself to people who had already decided. I took a salaried job at Caldwell Freight Solutions, paid the debt down, kept my head low in the specific way of someone who has learned that visibility costs more than it returns. Operations manager, mid-level, 7 direct reports, vendor payment cycles, quarterly reconciliations, clean reports. Not what I thought my life would look like at 31, but it was steady, and steady was what I needed. I had also, without quite deciding to, gotten very good at making sure being good at the job required almost none of what I actually had. 2 years in, the board announced a new CEO, Mara Kessler. I read the announcement the way you read a weather warning, with the focused attention of someone who wants to know whether action is required or whether waiting it out is the move. What came through the office grapevine was consistent. 3 previous restructurings, effective and fast, and not known for keeping things that didn't function. First week, she was there. 6 people from marketing were walked out before lunch on a Tuesday. I watched it happen from the other side of the floor with the stillness of someone who has already committed to not being in the path of anything. Third week of her tenure, she called all department heads in for individual 30-minute meetings. No agenda circulated beforehand. When my turn came, I brought a clean summary of my department's function, our vendor processing timelines, current reconciliation status, the kind of thing that looks prepared without being performative. She looked at it for about 4 seconds. Then she asked me a question that had nothing to do with the summary, technical, specific, the kind of question that exists to find out whether someone actually understands their operation or is managing the presentation of understanding it. I answered it, no framing, no positioning, just the answer. She wrote something down. I walked out without knowing what she'd written. 2 days later, her assistant emailed me. She wanted me assigned as operational liaison to a process improvement project. 6 to 8 weeks. Sessions as needed. I assumed it was restructuring. Housekeeping. I scheduled the first session and didn't think about it again until I was sitting across from her in that conference room. And she closed the door, not locked it, closed it. That difference would matter later. She sat down and told me that what she needed from me was not a process improvement project. What she'd found in the procurement records was a pattern. Vendor payments that didn't match contracts, individually small. The kind that disappear into normal variance on a casual pass. But across 18 months and 3 vendor categories, they added up to something that didn't happen by accident. The pattern pointed upward. She couldn't use the internal audit team. The head of that team had been hired by the CFO, who appeared in the pattern in ways she was still mapping. She needed someone inside operations who understood the vendor logic, someone without visible ties to the people involved, someone who hadn't spent the past 3 weeks trying to manage what she thought of them. She said I could decline the assignment, that she would find another approach if I'd rather not be involved. I thought about Marcus, about the specific experience of having believed I understood a situation and discovering, too late, that my understanding had been constructed for me. What happens if you're wrong about what you found? I said. She didn't take time to think about it. Then I'm wrong, and I've wasted both our time. Something in the plainness of that. When do we start? I said. It wasn't really a question. If you stay for stories where the complicated part is also the real part, go ahead and subscribe. I don't clean these up before I tell them. 3 evenings a week, after the floor cleared, the cover story held. My team thought I'd been tapped for something bureaucratic and slow. That worked for everyone. The work was dense and genuinely difficult. The payment pattern was embedded across 18 months and 3 separate vendor categories, and separating anomalous payments from messy record keeping from an understaffed period required someone who understood the operational logic of each category well enough to know which was which. That was me, so we worked. Week 1 was almost entirely professional in the way that first weeks of anything tend to be. She asked precise questions. I gave precise answers. When we finished for the night, there was nothing in the room except the work. Week 2, I found an error in her analysis. She had misattributed a vendor code. It shifted the pattern in a way that looked more damning, but was actually less defensible. If she took that version to the board, someone who knew the vendor structure could dismantle it. I told her directly. No diplomatic framing, no leading with a compliment, just, this code is misattributed. It changes the read on the week 9 data. She stopped. Checked it. You're right. Fix it. That was the whole response. No pause to absorb the correction. No performance of being unaffected by it. Just, you're right. Fix it. I drove home that night and sat with that for a while. I had spent 2 years in an environment where being right in front of authority required careful packaging, where the correction was always cushioned inside something that protected the other person's equilibrium. She just said, fix it. It was such a small thing. I thought about it longer than I should have. Week 3, past 9. Building empty. The vending machines were the only food option. She went first. I heard it from down the hall, that particular thud of a machine dispensing something. When I went a few minutes later, she was still in the hallway, leaning against the wall, printed page in one hand, coffee in the other, black. The specific brand the office had a running joke about. It had been described, by various people over various years, as everything from burnt rubber to a personal affront. She was drinking it while reading, and had the mild expression of someone doing a task that is necessary rather than enjoyable. I got what I came for. We walked back. She was talking about a discrepancy in the week 2 vendor timeline. I was responding. Neither of us said anything about the fact that we were 2 professionals eating bad food in a dim hallway at 9:15 because the situation required it. It was the most relaxed I'd been around her since this started. I noticed again that she'd chosen the bad coffee. I didn't say anything. Week 4 ran long, almost 2 hours straight, both of us going through separate data sets and cross-referencing, the pattern getting clearer in a way that was simultaneously satisfying and heavier than either of us set out loud. At some point I was working through a vendor timeline, and I heard her go quiet. Not the working quiet, which had its own specific quality, a different kind. I looked up. She was asleep. Her head had dropped forward slightly. Her hand was still near the keyboard. Not a dramatic collapse, just the gradual thing that happens when someone has been running on too little for too long, and a quiet room finally gives the body permission. I looked at her for a moment, went back to my work. I'm not entirely sure why I didn't wake her. I think I understood, without putting it into words, that she had not chosen to fall asleep in front of me, and something felt important about not turning that into a moment she'd have to manage. She woke up 4 minutes later. Her head came up. She looked at the screen, picked up mid-sentence from where she'd stopped. No apology, no mention of it. Just back to the data. I kept my eyes on my own screen and tried not to think too hard about the fact that I was glad I'd been the one in the room for that. The next session, I brought 2 cups from the vending machine, set one on her side of the table before she sat down, opened my laptop, pulled up the week 5 data. She came in, looked at the table. There was a brief moment where she looked at the cup and then looked at me, and I was already looking at the screen. She sat down, picked up the cup, drank it. Nothing was said, but something passed between us in that silence that had no professional category. I didn't examine it. I just noted it the way you note something you're not ready to deal with yet. Week 5, Tuesday. My car didn't start. Battery, flat and final, in the parking garage at 10 o'clock. All the subtle drama of a machine that picked its moment well. I called a service. 45-minute wait minimum. I was sitting on the hood when I heard footsteps. Mara, coat on, bag on her shoulder, keys in hand. She looked at the car, looked at me. I said, battery, and she nodded once. Then she walked to the wall of the garage about 15 feet away, leaned against it, and took out her phone. She didn't offer to stay. She just stayed, working by the look of it, not making a thing of it, not checking on me, just present in the garage, the way a person is present when they've decided to be there and don't need it acknowledged. The truck came. 12 minutes to fix. I started the engine, confirmed it was running. She pushed off the wall. Good, she said, walked to her car. I watched her cross the garage. I didn't know what to do with someone who stayed, without needing me to know they stayed, without building it into anything, without the small performance of generosity that usually accompanies an inconvenient choice. She just did it, and then moved on. The drive home took 20 minutes. I thought about it the whole way. The pattern took 6 weeks to map completely. By week 5, we knew enough to be fairly certain about the primary actor. By week 6, the documentation was solid enough to take to the board. And by week 6, I was aware of something I had been carefully not examining. The sessions had stopped feeling like an assignment. They felt like something I was showing up to. That distinction made me uncomfortable in a specific way. The kind of discomfort that comes not from something being wrong, but from something being real, in a situation where real is complicated. What I can say clearly is this. She had stopped managing her impression on me somewhere in the middle of those 6 weeks. Not as a decision, I don't think. Just as the thing that happens when 2 people spend enough late evenings together, past the point where performance is sustainable. And I had started volunteering things she hadn't asked for. Context about how certain vendor relationships worked, reasoning behind payment timing that helped her read the anomalies more precisely. Not because she asked, because I thought it would help, and because somewhere along the way, I had started to care whether what she brought to that boardroom was actually right, not just sufficient. Those are different things. I knew they were different things. I just wasn't ready to look at what the difference meant. Week 6. Standard procedure. She handed me a file set to cross-reference, same as a dozen times before. I went through the folders. Most of it was familiar. Then I opened one I hadn't seen, an email thread between Mara and the board chairman. I read the date first, the way you read dates when something already feels slightly wrong. 6 weeks before she officially started at the company, in the email, she was recommending the vendor expansion strategy, specifically, clearly, in writing. The same strategy at the center. of what we had been investigating for 6 weeks. I read it once, then again. She had told me she went in without a complete picture of the vendor relationships, that her understanding of the problem only became clear once she was on the ground. The email had a different date. I closed the folder. I sat there, and then something happened that I recognized from the inside before I recognized it from the outside. The floor-dropping feeling. The last time I'd felt it was sitting in a lawyer's office, going through a partnership agreement I thought I understood. Same feeling, different room, different person. I finished the session. I was accurate and professional and present in every technical sense and completely absent in every way that mattered. She noticed. I know because I am good at not being noticed, and the sessions that followed had the quality of two people who are both aware of something that neither one is going to say first. She didn't ask. Her not asking was its own kind of answer at the time, though I misread which question it was answering. 2 more sessions. I gave her what the work required. She accepted it. We were both precise and courteous, and the ease that had accumulated over weeks had simply disappeared, and neither of us acknowledged the disappearance. Told myself the cold was the honest version, that whatever I thought had been building between us was a function of proximity and shared pressure and the natural confusion that comes from spending too many late evenings in the same room with someone. I was good at telling myself things like that. I had practice. Final session. Documentation complete. She said she would be taking it forward from here. You did good. Work. I appreciate the opportunity. Both. True. Both completely wrong underneath. She extended her hand. I shook it. Her hand was cooler than I expected. I held the handshake 1 second longer than the situation called for, and then released in the same motion, so the extra second was almost undetectable. She held my gaze for 1 beat after we let go. Then she turned back toward her office. I took the elevator down, walked through the lobby, out into the night. I don't know what I expected to feel. I felt like I'd left something behind in the building that I was going to spend a long time pretending I hadn't left. The board meeting was 2 days later. I wasn't in the room. I heard about it through a colleague who had been adjacent to the debrief and caught pieces of it. The CFO had been placed on administrative leave. The findings were clear. The board accepted them. Then my colleague told me something else. Before anyone asked questions, before the procedural follow-up began, Mara had disclosed something. A pre-hire email. Her recommendation of the vendor expansion strategy. The context she'd had at the time. The context she hadn't had. She put her own potential liability on the table before the board thought to look for it. She told them she had endorsed a strategy based on a curated pitch she now understood was designed to obscure the pattern she'd spent 6 weeks uncovering. She wasn't framing it as a mistake. She was calling it exactly what it was. And she did it before anyone asked. My colleague finished. I said thanks, went back to my desk, sat there. I want to say I put it together quickly. I didn't. It took 2 days. 2 days of sitting with the fact that the email I found was not Mara hiding something. It was Mara, 6 weeks before joining a company, endorsing a strategy she had been handed by the board chairman. I didn't know there was a pitch deck I hadn't been given. I didn't know the folder I had was missing the context that changed the entire meaning of what I read. I had 1 email, an incomplete picture, and a 2-year-old fracture that had been waiting for exactly that shape to fall into it. I had done to her what I was afraid she had done to me. Defaulted to the managed version because the managed version was the one that kept me safe. And she had walked into a board meeting and volunteered the information that could have cost her everything before anyone had thought to ask for it, because she doesn't let things be found that she could have said first. On the 3rd day, I went to her office. Door open. I knocked on the frame. She looked up from her laptop. Her expression didn't change. Not unfriendly, just controlled, the way it was when she didn't yet know what a situation required. I stepped in, closed the door, stood in the middle of the room, and told her what I found: the email, the date, what I thought it meant, and what I did with that thought. I didn't dress it up. Then I told her about Marcus, not the full story, just enough. 2 years ago, a partner I trusted managed a situation rather than being honest with me, and I paid for it in ways that took a long time to stop. And when I opened that folder and saw that email, I had the same specific feeling I'd had in that lawyer's office, and I reached for the familiar red before I had the full picture. "I think I got it wrong," I said. "I wanted to tell you that in person." She held that for a moment. Then she told me about the board chairman's pitch deck, the separate folder, the information she was given before she started, and the information she only understood after she'd been inside the company long enough to see what the given information had been designed to obscure. She told it plainly. No performed composure, no smoothing over the part where she had endorsed something based on a picture she didn't know was incomplete. Then she said, "When you went cold, I knew something had changed." A pause. "I didn't ask because I didn't want to know if you'd just decided." "Decided what?" I said. She looked at me. "That I wasn't worth the effort." The office was quiet enough that I could hear the ventilation. I moved closer to the desk. "I was wrong," I said. "I'm telling you in person because 2 years ago I would have sent an email. I'm trying not to be that person." Something shifted in her face, not dramatically, the way a controlled expression shifts when it decides it no longer has a reason to be controlled. She stood, came around the desk, stopped in front of me at a distance that was neither professional nor committed, just a question, open, waiting. I didn't answer it immediately. I looked at her the way I hadn't let myself look at anyone in a long time, not searching for something, just there. Then I reached up and touched the side of her face. She closed her eyes for a second, just a second. When she opened them, "This is going to be complicated. Yes, I need you to actually tell me when something looks wrong to you," she said. "Not disappear. Tell me." "I know," I said. "I'm working on it." She looked at me for another moment. Then she leaned in. The kiss was quiet, careful, the kind that belongs to two people who have been moving toward each other for weeks and have finally stopped finding reasons to wait. I should tell you what I saw when I first walked into her office that day. On her desk, 2 cups from the vending machine, same bad brand, one half empty, one untouched, like she had fallen into a habit and kept it going past the point where it made obvious sense. I saw them before I said anything. I didn't bring them up. She saw me notice, and she let me notice. Neither of us needed to say what that meant. What came after wasn't a clean resolution. She was still CEO. I was still in operations. The disclosure went through HR in a brief, factual process that nobody made dramatic. A form, 3 signatures, a meeting with a department head who told us both, slightly uncomfortably, that we had handled it appropriately. Some people in the building had opinions. I heard a few, secondhand, and chose not to go looking for the rest. The CFO was formally removed 6 weeks after the board meeting. An external firm took over the audit. The company began stabilizing in the slow way that organizations stabilize when the right problem has been correctly identified and the person fixing it is willing to stay uncomfortable until it's done. Our Tuesday sessions changed shape. We still met, still went over data and operational reports and the metrics the board was tracking. But sometimes, when the work was finished and neither of us had closed the laptop, the conversation kept going. She told me once about a decision early in her career, a restructuring she had been certain about, where the certainty had caused her to stop checking whether she was still right. 3 people lost jobs they shouldn't have. She spent 6 months after that, rebuilding the specific habit of doubt, of pausing, even when she was certain, and asking the question again. I told her about the day I signed the papers, closing the consulting firm, the particular quality of signing something that had once meant everything and now meant the closing of it. She asked if it still hurt. I thought about it differently, I said. More like knowing where a scar is than feeling it all the time. She nodded, like she knew that particular geography from the inside. We were both people who had learned, from different sources, that trust in professional contexts is its own specific category of risk. That you can share a space with someone for years and still not know what they'll do when the pressure is high enough and a version of events that protects them is available. That kind of learning doesn't disappear because you meet someone you want to trust. It just makes the choice more visible. You can see the risk clearly. You know what it has cost before. You choose anyway. Not because you've stopped being afraid, but because being afraid has stopped being sufficient reason. There were still days when I felt myself starting to pull back, the old reflex, starting to go cold before I had enough information to justify it. The difference now was that I could see myself doing it, and she could too. She wouldn't call it out directly. She'd just ask me something ordinary about the work in front of us, something specific and practical. And the ordinary question was always doing something else underneath. It was keeping the room open, giving me something to respond to rather than silence to disappear into. I'd answer the ordinary question, and by answering it, I'd stay in the room. About 6 months after the board meeting, late Thursday, the floor mostly empty, she got up without saying anything, went to the vending machine, came back, set a cup on my side of the table, black, the bad brand, went back to her chair, and kept reading. I looked at the cup. She wasn't looking at me. I picked it up, drank it, and thought, this is what it actually looks like. Not the locked door, not the dramatic disclosure in the conference room, not even the office and what happened there. This, 2 cups on a table, placed without ceremony, on the right side. Someone noticing and choosing not to explain it. Someone else choosing to receive it the same way. That's the whole story, maybe. Just that, repeated